we came upon that when we deconstructed it. We said, why does that work better? And is there then a better way to do it? And that became part of the invention process.
Thank you for joining the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. We've been on the lookout to have an inventor come on the show for quite some time. And today, we're fortunate enough to have Doug Katz join us. He's a military veteran, West Point graduate, and inventor of the NULU adaptive knife. Here's Doug. Doug Katz, thank you for joining us. Where are you calling in from?
Trout Valley, Illinois. About an hour and 15, hour and a half northwest of the city. Actually, was the old Hertz estate. It's a cool, like my house isn't the old Hertz estate. The old Hertz estate was converted to a community years ago, but it's really an amazing place that we have to find. So,
can you see the stars at night? That type of quiet.
You can see the stars at night. Like I call it the Shire, right? Like it's unique, and it's a very unique place. So it's fun.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Doug. There was something that probably should have asked many previous guests because there seems to be some commonality amongst entrepreneurs where, not that it has a genetic component, but a lot of entrepreneurs that I know, somebody in their family was also an entrepreneur. Is that true for you? Do you have somebody that's older than you in your family?
My grandfather was a plumber, and I believe, I hate to say it, I don't know company, but I don't think the startup type entrepreneur the same way. And I think for me, it was way more a combination of my terrible ADD and then having been in the military and then having been in corporate America and realizing that just wasn't a good fit. It just moves at a slower pace. And I think it's not that there isn't innovation, but there's not the same entrepreneurialism. So I'm kind of the first to do that, to my knowledge.
What you were a red leg. Can you tell I'm also a red leg, but
there you go.
Probably don't know what that is. So can you educate us? What is a red leg?
Is an artilleryman, an artillery person. I guess I have to be right. But in previous wars, years and years and years ago, like I think of the Revolution, War of 1812 time period, up through the Civil War, I believe, and my history is failing me, but they used to wear red pants, and it was in fact, there is a old Clint Eastwood movie where there was a red leg that he was hunting who had done him dirty. So, but yes, I was an artillery officer. I think that actually shapes a little bit of how I work as an entrepreneur too, in terms of the entire battle space, thinking of things kind of the same way. But I do think military, I think if you don't have entrepreneurialism in your DNA, the military can bring it out, and there are some amazing resources out there. And I think I wouldn't be as far as I would without really generous resources out there to help drive veteran entrepreneurialism. I went through the Bunker Labs, which is now veteran in residence. And that's an amazing one. There's also Warrior Rising, but there are a lot of really, really awesome resources. So for me, that's kind of how my path has begun.
And that program, can you describe what that entailed a little bit? Was it like a business generator?
I looked into both Warrior Rising, which is a really, really good one, and Bunker Labs. Bunker Labs just made more sense for me. They're free online accelerators. With Warrior Rising, you have to go through some preliminary work where they sort of screen you. Bunker Labs seemed less so. Where I was in my business, it just made sense. The preliminary stuff didn't apply as much, but you can just go to their websites. Again, Warrior Rising, I think, is warriorrising.org, and Bunker Labs. There's an online community anybody can join, and then their accelerator that you can get into. And it's, I want to say, about 3 months, once a week. I would not be where I am right now with my business ready to launch our Kickstarter had I not gone through that.
So the main thing that I reached out to you for is you're an inventor. I've been wanting to get an inventor on. We did have the great folks from the gentleman that did the iPhone app, which software as a service is super hot, but I wanted somebody that actually went through the process of bringing a physical product to market. That's a personal fascination of mine. I talk a little bit about it in the book Scintilla. So in line with that, of course, the book is how to come up with an idea. So I love asking the question, how specifically did the idea? So first of all, tell us what the idea is, but I'm
So
very
this,
curious as to
and
how
of
you came
course,
up
as
with
a good inventor, if you invent something, have it with you at all times. This is a little hard to travel with, but this is our knife. It's called the NULU, short for NULU, and it's held. This is not the use case. I've got videos that you can link to. We're launching our crowd October, and should be available for purchase soon after that. But it's an adaptive knife. So basically, if you were to think of a circle being the center of the circle, we've created a design where this is the outer part of the circle, and any radius along that line is a good transfer of force, right? So this one's a little bit different, i.e., chopping, but with this, you can get what works for you, and it's reversible. So you can cleave this way, you can precision cut this way. It's always hard to like move back and be able to show it this way.
And from ideation to proof of concept, how many iterations or designs did you go through before you
There's a
arrived at
lot.
that?
Like I could send you a picture if you want. I've created in my workshop the NULU Museum, and we went
Yeah,
through a lot of
love
iterations.
it.
But I and this is where what I would say with inventors especially is don't don't hoard your idea. Find people who can help you. And I have the benefit of being an older entrepreneur, which means for me, I think there's a wisdom, a patience, a lack of I've invested and done well. I can't retire tomorrow, but I can take risks and I can trade equity because I don't necessarily need the home run. So I started with the invention myself, but then picked up a longtime friend who's a design guy. He worked in the toy industry, picked him up, but then along the way realized, hey, I have an attorney as part of my team. That's helping me a lot because the problem is for me, we can make small changes, and because he's he's a founder equity stakeholder, super expensive, super important to find the right person who understands the art that you're in. Because when you do a patent, it goes to a different part of the PTO, and if your patent lawyer hasn't written the right patent, it can be devastating. For me, it just worked out that I built a team around invention, ideation. With the eventual, we have the eventual aspiration of becoming a venture studio, which that's another place inventors can go. If you have a good idea and you can prototype it and you can, let's say, go through something like an accelerator or go through the process with a mentor of turning ideation into validation, a venture studio is there to provide the resources in exchange for ownership for the things that you need. And there are more of those out there. People need to research. Any kind of entrepreneur, if you think you know it all, you shouldn't even start down that process. And I have become more coachable, more open-minded since I have become an entrepreneur than I ever was in corporate America.
And for the audience's benefit, of course, being in the military, we love our acronyms. So I always like to explain them for the audience. PTO is Patent and Trademark Office.
Oh, sorry
And
about that. Sorry about that.
no, you're
Yeah,
fine. No, that's my job. That's my job. I'll take those acronyms all day long. And so going back to the initial question, so let's say Heinz 57, for instance, that I think that formula that became Heinz 57 was the 57th version that
right.
came out, and I don't know if that's an urban myth or not, but people
Yep.
can troll me in the comments if I'm wrong there. But
Right.
did it take
Yeah,
dozens
I
of
probably
versions?
have 5 or 6 other versions. And yeah, about 5 or 6. Like this is close to production. We're making some small changes. This is not production steel, which brings up the point. Prototyping is prototyping. We were getting real hung up at one point about, do you need production stainless? So we have this actually in evaluation right now by a bunch of adaptive offices around the country. Every state has an adaptive office. We just send it to them and we say have to sharpen it a little more often, but we felt it was more important to get it out there. So yes, prototype, change it. And the interesting thing is when I went through Bunker Labs, one of the speakers said a great point. I guess it was a Stephen King quote: kill your darlings, have a good editor and kill your darlings. And this looks like what I created, but very different from it. And the good team, what I've said is I am the inventor, but at this point, it's not mine. when everybody decided to take the risk and come on board, it's everybody's product. And that really supercharged prototyping, because I no longer said I have veto power. I told everybody this is ours. And that's, I think, where, prototyping it for a reason. And as we got feedback back, like with the weight, like I made one that this thing is like, it is so heavy, but you have to, and I was like, God dang, that was so much work for something that really is more like for killing zombies.
Not to keep plugging my book, but there's a part in there that says consumption drives production. And
Yep.
I mentioned in there, I said, it's okay if you love reading nonfiction or you love fantasy movies, but if you're consuming information rooted in reality, rooted in solving problems, or related to the industry that you want to work in, that consumption is going to serve the function of what you're trying to do. So
Right.
you mentioned earlier, as far as the design being related to something indigenous, can you tell us where the history of that comes from?
Yeah,
Was there a knife somewhere?
absolutely. The Ulu knife is if you know anyone who went on an Alaska cruise or who was stationed in Alaska, most of them have an Ulu. And the Ulu was the indigenous knife of like the Inuit cultures and all the cultures up sort of in that northern or northern Arctic circle area. Antarctic's down south. I don't look like a schmuck. But so up there, it's a typically a half moon shape, and it was called the everything knife. It was the woman's knife, and I say that with the highest regard because it was regarded as a very, very useful item where men had a pointy knife. And this was part of our design. You'll see that our design has no point because, as I like to joke, the point is pointless unless you're stabbing. And men hunted, they had spears, and when you do field craft, right, you're field craft, you're out there, you might need something that's got a pointy edge. But it ends when you don't need that. And so this design, you could cut hair, you could dress an animal, you could, you can do all these tools, had some very good inherent benefits. What we did is we deconstructed that. Why? Actually, what's interesting, and on the invention side, we created this, knew it worked, then had to explain to people why it worked. And it wasn't enough to say, we took a lot of great conceptual components of the best knives and brought them together with a certain force transfer geometry, right? We came upon that when we deconstructed it. We said, why does that work better? And is there then a better way to do it? And that became part of the invention process, right? The why of this is better. Why is it better? Because I'm just getting better at pitches, right? This is all new to me. But the first pitch I did was disastrous. I mean, luckily it was among friends. It was at an event. It was like, I think it was through like the Westport Entrepreneur Group, but there were a lot of Bunker Labs folks there. And it was a crash and burn. And that was when I said, okay, I have to get better at doing this, because the only way that people will buy into a new knife, thousands of year old technology, is if I can articulate why it's better. And that's been part of our process of getting there. But we knew the Ulu was good. And if you talk to somebody, they're like, this is the best knife ever. Doesn't mean it can't be better. And frankly, it's really funny when you get a crowd of people, they're like, oh, I totally understand. And I'm hoping that every time I pitch, I have a plant in the audience, like an unintentional plant, because they'll get it. You see these nods and they're like, oh, I totally get it. And it's actually led us to some interesting things about this and some interesting markets, because most Ulus are in a stand, like when you buy them from the person who make them, and most of them are craft knives, beautifully made knives. So we don't want to compete with something that is, and I guess we compete a little ways, but people buying Ulu are buying it as sort of a showpiece knife, and it sits in a stand. We've actually gone from a business perspective to say, well, wait a minute. When you're talking to investors or talking to anyone, they want to know your product line. Well, this sits in our cutting board that we sell, and the cutting board, then it's on display, and the cutting board has a bowl in it, right? So now our knife gains prominence in the kitchen and sits out there. So we're expecting that, the first people that buy it, the early adopters, they'll have this sitting on their counter, and someone comes in and says, "Hey, oh crap, what is that?" And then is able to, then we are able to expand our awareness organically that way, just because the design plays on some of the advantages that the NULU or that the Ulu already had.
And for people that don't know, one of the worst things you can do with a kitchen knife is throw it into a drawer with other kitchen knives because
Yep.
it'll dull them. So people are like, why aren't my blades holding an edge?
Yeah.
It's because you're dumping it in there with a bunch of high carbon steel and they're bumping
And
around and
and it's funny because I have a very good friend, another academy guy who was trained as a chef when he got out of the military. Changes to this final design that I can't necessarily disclose, but he said one of the big issues in commercial kitchen is, where do you put a knife? Now, one of our huge advantages is this can be used on a cook surface, right? Because it's the control area and the cutting area are above each other, or I can use it on a flat top grill or whatever. In a commercial kitchen now, this gives a really, really good benefit, but where do you put it? So we've come up with unique ways where you're not setting it somewhere where you have cross contamination, which is the big issue. So you find out things about your invention, and that's where you just have to be open minded. And I have jokingly referred to my entrepreneurial journey on the invention space as Forrest Gump and Oppenheimer, right? Like I'm sort of letting the wind take me to where I need and being a lot more open to the signals I'm hearing, but finding the right people then to transfer that into an actionable plan. And it's really enlightening. It's been sort of this aspect of, and this is the hard part for military guys. You don't have to do everything, right? They seem to unlearn the collaborative approach that they did in the military, and then they get out and they're like, well, I'm going to show that I can do everything, or I'm going to, and that's the worst way to be an entrepreneur, because and you're like, okay, how much time did I lose, right? And like, how quickly do I have to get to market, and what are all these other considerations beyond just, hey, it's going to cost me this much in equity or writing a check or whatever, to find the right people to do it.
with all of this work that you and your team have put in, what was the what was the plan in place to protect your intellectual property or IP as we call
Well, that's interesting. So looking at it the normal way, right? Anything I go to, people are like, do you have a patent? And it's a reflexive thing, right? You're a vet, right? It's almost like the thing, right? Everybody's like, oh, you're making a product. Do you have a patent? You really should create a patent. But when I started down this process, I didn't know that there were utility design patents and that you could have both. That I didn't know that there was a provisional patenting process where you can secure your idea without fully committing one way or the other. Ensure that you're also copywriting and doing all the layering of trademarks and patents to really be able to protect the entire thing. Because if you're lucky enough to get in front of a jury, which is way harder and harder to do based on how the patent office currently operates, having a entire file of how you worked through this process from ideation to MVP and beyond will give you an edge when something's in front of a jury, if you can get that. The current state of the patent office has something called the Patent Trial and Appeal Board. And that is a non-judicial, you're not in front of a jury, way that your patent can be challenged. Not that someone came up with it first. That's what everybody tells you. Well, you need that patent because they don't even do that anymore. What they do now is they'll drag you into the PTAB and say, well, we don't want to challenge their patent that we came. It's an obvious patent. It's obvious it was given to the person in error, and we're just going to invalidate it. And if you want to read a story of an inventor that got really, really, really tragically screwed by that, her name is Molly Metz. She's part of an organization I am called usinventor.org. She's a world-class jump roper, which I didn't even know until I joined this organization, had invented this amazing jump rope and got ripped off by the actually licensing the product. And she had a company of 40 people, I think it was, and now that got invalidated. And so what people have to understand is, they're like, oh, I've got this patent. It's this suit of, spiritual armor that will protect it, and you will get screwed. And the sad part about it is that the patent, the PTAB, the Patent Trial and Appeal Board, is financed through people who make the challenges. So ultimately, they are incented to have as many challenges to patents as they can, because that's how they make their money. And it's not the big companies that lose out. It is small inventors who will lose their constitutional right to property of what they created. And travesty. So what I would tell any inventor is get smart. And actually, I would join usinventor.org. I don't benefit any by telling them that, but this is the one organization that is consistently appealing to Congress and other elected officials to fix this, because it is putting the U.S. at an innovation disadvantage. It isn't only U.S. companies that can challenge the validity of a patent, and it's not only stuff like this, it's technology. And when they invalidate a patent, we can no longer protect it. And there are, I don't know the exact number, they can go to that website, usinventor.org, but there are a number of technologies that we are now behind because of patent invalidation. So it's really, really a bad scene. I'm not an expert on it. I have enough knowledge about it to say any out there that should get smart, because there could be a strategic aspect of when you go to market. We're a bunch of over 50 veterans creating products for the adaptive space and other potentially disabled veterans. We're trying to, as much as we can, produce in the U.S. We're trying to do things where if someone comes in and says, we're gonna, then we would use the full power of the court of public opinion to make it look bad and try and destroy their reputation by trying to destroy what's ours. And I hope you see more of that, because the same way companies get savaged for being woke or whatever is against someone's belief structure, companies that steal the patents of people. In fact, it's so bad that if you create something that you can patent, and then you try and defend that patent, they say, we don't care if you invented it, you haven't brought it to market, you're not commercializing it yet, so you're adding no value. Any licensing, right? Like if you're like, well, wait a minute, if I can't protect patents, how can I license it? Because the only way for me to commercialize it is licensing. That's gone. Because what they'll say is, why should I license it? What I can do is go into the PTAB, and I have all the resources. And oh, by the way, after I invalidate one claim on your patent, I'm going to drag you back in there on another claim. Right? So it is a really, really rigged system, truly rigged. Well, this prototype I actually did create just on things that I bought, not specialized grinders, because the sort of the way that it could be ground lended itself better for those things. Well, anybody can invent then, right? There's all these different organizations and that could sort of, everybody has to get involved. And I hate to sound like somebody who is against big anything, but this affects big tech. It affects big consumer goods. It affects big everything when individual small inventors can no longer protect their property.
And of course, let's be realistic that the small business owner was the heart of the U.S. economy for a long time. It drives innovation.
Yes.
And of course, that through the courts and through the systems and mechanisms that you've talked about, that's starting to go away. And, we could get really deep into the what's happening because of that, and none of it's good. So, of course, me being very pro-innovation, wanting people to get inspired, get their ideas out there. And you said something early on before we started recording that when you said it, I thought, this is amazing. So I wanted to make sure we brought this back up. You said that everyone ages into disability. And as soon as you said, I knew immediately what you meant. And I thought that is a brilliant way to look at adaptive devices, because it's not just, I'm a disabled veteran. There's certain things that I can't do that I could do 25 years ago. And of course, those same problems are probably going to get worse as I age. So I just thought that was a really great way.
Well, it's interesting because people bitch about the VA, right? But in some ways, their system of evaluation sort of was a little bit of an inspiration for our ability curve, our proprietary model that we came up with, right? Where the VA looks and says, okay, you have, let's say, tinnitus, and that used to be like a 10%. Okay, at that point, you're 90% able-bodied and 10% disabled. And I think the military, the VA does a good job of saying just because you're disabled doesn't mean you're dead, right? Like it's really funny because sometimes I'll be like, well, should I be out there doing things if I'm disabled, right? I'm a disabled vet. And then I look and I go, wait, but some dude just ran by me with prosthesis, right? So I think there's this aspect of this weird classification. And that's when we started to say, instead of saying disabled and not disabled, we created a 10 level scale of 10 being able bodied. Like basically no limitations, no pain, nothing, and then working down. And if you consider that, you're in that point very, very short amount of time of your life. And in fact, there'll be points where you're not in that even during that age group. Because we broke it down by 10-year age increments. But let's say you're 28 and you play rugby like I was in my 20s and you separate your shoulder. Well, guess what? You're temporarily disabled. So then by bringing it to a scale, then it's an ability to look and say, okay, what are the common symptomatic manifestations across that? And we should be designing for that. We are not a treatment. And as a result, we are not worried about the reason that there are the symptoms. We're worried about the manifestation. And what we found was adaptive stuff looked like torture devices, right? They would take a traditional knife, stick a handle on it and go, great, now it's adaptive. Instead of looking like, well, okay, a traditional knife is bad in the first place. Like I'm usually better about this and I don't have a regular knife. But if you were to look at this as being a regular knife, and let's say the spine was up here, a chef will hold a knife on like the handle here. They're going to hold the blade this way and cut. And then the handle is actually balanced. I was talking to a chef and they were showing me, I love to cook, but I pick it up just self-taught, right? Like I'll watch shows where it shows someone doing short order cooking. I'm like, that's what I want to know how to do. Or ethnic cooking. Like when you see what they do, the sooner that you understand that you are gradually becoming less able every day and should live your life in a balance of how do I stave that off through fitness, nutrition, good exercise, sleep, and also understanding that some limitations are inevitable and that the better you adapt, the better you could do the other stuff I was talking about, the more quality of life you're going to have. And that's really where we have that vision, right? Like I look at it and I'm like, if you're not sort of jacked up by the time you're in your 50s, what were you doing for the last 50 years? Because you can do it now, but I look at the stupid stuff I did and legitimately now look and say, hey, it's probably not the wisest decision. And circumstances were such that it ended up well. That's, I started listening to Scott Galloway's podcast. I love it. There's a lot of really good things. And he ends every podcast with life is rich. And the way I look at it is saying, life is rich, but you only taste that richness if you beat the crap out of it in a lot of ways, right? However, if you push yourself to your limits mentally and everything else, that's when growth occurs. It's like tearing down muscle so the muscle grows so that you build muscle. So we're trying to sort of embrace the decline. I almost thought of it, and I'm a real analogy guy. I got my wife a plug-in hybrid, and I've been playing with the regenerative braking. I love it. Like you can drive with one pedal. It's really cool. But I look at us as sort of being regenerative braking for aging along the ability curve. And an ability to say, wow, you know what? I can take this aging and I can understand it and I can continue to live a full life. And that's kind of what we're looking at.
Something that fascinates me, and of course we already talked a little bit about it, is the inception of the idea. And you said ideation, which is great because I probably, that word in the book, scintilla, is probably used more than anything because that's what that book is all about.
Yep.
It's about how to create that initial spark,
right?
That moment in your brain. And earlier, before we started recording,
right.
You said my jacuzzi is my think tank, and I love
right.
that. I said, "Oh, we're definitely going to add that. We're going to talk about that because there's actually biological reasons for why showers and jacuzzis and places like that.
Oh, that's super funny. I didn't realize that.
Yes,
so Archimedes, right? Like,
there's a whole body of science behind it. It's amazing. So, um, and of course, I hope they they get the book to find out more. But of course, if you're in a state of unfocused relaxation,
yes,
where you've been, the ideal situation is you've been thinking about a problem. You're in problem solving mode. You're in very intense thinking. Then you detach and you go relax. So you either
yes,
go take a walk, which Einstein did, and that walking, even if you're out in an expansive space, like I said at the beginning, or you're out where you can see the stars. So when you're seeing that large void, or if you're in a giant, beautiful building and you're in a state of relaxation after a period of intensity, boom, that's
yep,
that's the formula where the spark happens in your brain. So you're in
yep,
the jacuzzi, it's hot, you're relaxed, you
yep,
detach from the problem solving, and then boom, in comes that lightning
yep.
for
There's
you
there's
at the moment.
there's three places that are my key spots for ideation. One is my think tank, and I joke like I have a lot of ink, and somewhere on there's going to be an Archimedes one because him jumping out of the tub. But I have those same moments. But walking my dog, which I try and do actually before the sun comes up, because I think, and I always try and catch the sun coming over. There's one place in the valley where you can see it, and I try and catch it. But I think it's interesting, sort of that darkness for me is that transition, and I go, it's me and my dog, and then mowing my lawn. And I have this might be unique to me, but I have a little over an acre, but my yard is very, very unique. It's got a lot of weird hills and a lot of trees, and I never mow it the same way twice because conditions are such that, like, I was stupid. I bought the cheapest mower because I never got a riding mower. So the hills become difficult. And I've actually flipped it twice, and that's a big joke amongst my neighbors because I flipped it, and just because I've done martial arts for a long time, I've got pretty good reaction still for an old guy, and I literally like jumped up and it rolled and I landed on my feet, and they're like, "Oh my God!" Like, but because I have to think about how I'm approaching mowing it, it feels like it activates a different part of my brain because I'm like, oh, okay, that hill's a little wetter today. How am I going to approach it? Because I won't be able to get up it. Or, wow, I took a turn a certain way and all the trees make it so that I can't follow, because a flat lawn, you just go grid. And those are kind of the three places that I ideate because then I'll be like, okay, wow, this is an interesting idea. But the other thing people have to remember, I'm going to date myself, and you'll probably laugh at this, but there was a movie in the 80s with Michael Keaton called Night Shift. And it was one
Great
of my favorite.
film.
He played a character named Bill Blazkowski. And this is when
Yes.
people had Walkmans. And he was like, I got ideas coming at me all day long. I carry this tape recorder. He was like talking about feeding mayonnaise to tuna fish so you could have the tuna salad, right? And it was ridiculous. But for someone with ADHD and an innovative mind, writing stuff down is really important because I will have an idea and forget it half an hour later. So I have gotten way better with technology of saying, okay, I got to write that one down, or I'll text my partners right away, the right ones, to say, hey, what do you think about this? But I think people do need to find their ideation space and sort of keep it in reverence because it's almost like when people say, keep your bed for sleep, don't have a TV in your bedroom. I think if you really do look at, there's sort of a meditative component. And I've tried to get into meditation, and for me, it's hard because I have monkey mind, I have ADHD. And I still do that, but I find for me, it is more sort of engagement, like things that can attach to my shiny object thinking, right? Where then it takes that distraction off the table and the rest of it can seem to process. And for me, that works that way.
And Doug, as we were approaching the end, you mentioned that you were a podcaster as well, and with a lot of experience. So for people like me that are a little bit newer into it, I think we're coming up on episode 30 here. So we'll have episode 30 in the can probably by next week. What were some of the main lessons? So for people that are interested in starting a
Right.
podcast or they've just started,
That's a
because
great, we stopped doing it. It was a part of the business I'm no longer in. I used to do lending and it was in the divorce space. And the first thing I would say is, it's like any other venture. Like if it's a veteran, go through one of these accelerators with the podcast in mind and come up with who your target audience is. What do they want to hear? So for our divorce one, at one point, we made it about divorce specifically. Who listened to it? Divorce nerds, like attorneys and stuff. So we shifted to something that was about new beginnings. And we got some decent listenership. But what I would say is go into it with an open mind. Like we've talked about starting one for our company because we're really deep into trying to connect with disabled communities. But knowing in the past, like what's involved, scope it the right way and understand what's involved with it. If you're producing your own, it's a full-time job finding good guests because you can find guests. We had someone who came on our show once and completely talked about nothing of what they said they were going to talk to. And at that point, we're like, oh, have to vet it a little bit better. And we should have known that, but you're trying to figure it out. Come up with an interval in the beginning that's manageable. To do a deeper dive, let's say once a month. And then what we actually started to do and record 2 or 3 a day on a certain day, do some overtime and have 3 of them in the can where, let's say, my partner at that time had some health problems and we all of a sudden found ourselves not able to record. Well, we were about 3 or 4 shows ahead. So we were able to take a breath and say, okay, we can work on it. So I would say just understand what's involved and talk to people who are doing it. Listen to ones that you like. And it's okay to take some stuff from the format. Like we had a really interesting format at one point where it was a panel and we would have a divorce attorney. We would have all different divorce experts talking about a particular thing. It was a great way to go. And it actually may have ended up a better format, but that is a full-time job podcast for somebody who is saying, I see value in this. I'm not going to grow my business. I'm going to find sponsorship that will pay then to be on this, and I really need to grow it. It's not a lark. It is something that you better be committed to, unless it's a hobby one. There's a couple that I know through one of the chamber relationships. I'm in all the chamber of commerce. I'm in like 2 or 3 of them up here, and it's a husband and wife. She's like an accountant, and they just do sort of a human interest one as a couple, and you could tell that they love doing it together. They want to try and transition over to it, but they have the freedom to grow it. And I wish I knew the name. I would give them a shout out. And I would say try and compete in a community where you have an advantage. If you're a veteran, do it in the veteran space. If you're a woman, do it in the woman space, and look at what your competition is. I know people are like, oh, this will be great. But if there's 8 people already doing it who have a lot of listenership, try taking what you do and being a guest first. Being a guest, understanding how hard it is to produce a podcast. If you are actually a meaningful guest with something to say, you will get booked. And as you get booked, then you get a body of work where then you understand what your value is. And that would be the other thing I would say.
And of course, Doug, you understand the value of being on podcasts where you can talk about your product. Now, we're running out of time, but I do want to do some rapid fire
Sure.
questions where I can get kind of your main reaction to these because I think they're relevant. So I love the fact that you brought up Chamber of Commerce because that was mentioned in the latest episode where I told people to get more involved in that because people have kind of forgotten about the chamber. So what's the one big takeaway from not necessarily being a membership of the Greater Chamber of Commerce, but attending the events? What's the one big...
I would say the Chamber of Commerce is just one part. If you're an entrepreneur, you better be out there, right? And that's why you got to build a good team. So the Chamber of Commerce is great because you'll find things. So for me, we had not even considered this for Down syndrome, for kids who have Down syndrome. There is a group called Gigi's Playhouse. It's like a national organization that's about kids with Down and helping them gain independence and giving them a safe place and all that. Well, that opened up a market I had not even thought of. And maybe we would have tripped on it, but they're actually headquartered in Illinois. So I have an ability then to maybe get to a bigger group. I think it's also good to be known in your community, especially if you're going to do something like a Kickstarter. Geographical relevance is good. People want to help you, and they got to know you to help you. But I would say the chamber is part of it. Find all the organizations that are relevant. So one of the good things about accelerators, especially if you're going to one that's regional, is they'll have events. You will find a lot of entrepreneurial events that are tangential to that too. There, in Illinois, in Chicago area, there's one called Roll Call, which is great. But you got to get out there because
Mhm.
people are really not going to steal your idea. Like it's really hard. Like you look and you're like, wow, it's hard to decide whether I'm going to be an entrepreneur, but I'm not going to tell anybody about it because they're going to steal it. And you're like,
That's right.
it's hard enough for me to make
Uh,
this decision. So the best part is to go because you will trip over opportunities. And like for me, seeking investment, seeking funding, it's essential that you get out there because I find myself again in a lot of technology situations. But if you're able to articulate your value proposition and what you're doing well, people will say, I'm not the right guy, but I'll introduce you to this person. And your what is it? Your network is your net worth. I've heard that so many times. And it's true. And it can't just be like, oh, I know this person. Like, don't go with the what can you do for me? Find people's stories, and then you'll be like, oh, well, that's a really interesting. You used to do something a long time ago that has a relevance. Do you still have relationships? And you'll find things when you get out there. And I just think it's important, especially for younger entrepreneurs, because between COVID and just how technology works today, they think they can. Sometimes there's a perception that everything is tech based, and nothing can replace going out and meeting people and seeing them in person and them being able to see your passion or your personality or something where it only takes one person to say, hey, I'm going to help you with this business, to help you get to that next level, to then be exposed to more people and more people and more people. So I just say get out there. But the chamber just is great because it's like-minded. It's just a good place to meet people. And frankly, if you're a guy like me who's sort of regional and broader, it's a chance to talk about your product and pitch without like it's not an investor, so you can kind of see what works in kind of a safer space.
for people that have considered doing a Kickstarter, what could you share? Two main takeaways of what you've learned from launching a
What
Kickstarter.
with that one, I would say talk to me in October because we're launching it then. But I think the big part about that is take some time, find the ones that are working and figure out what works. Because with Kickstarter, what I've learned is to some degree, setting your goal at the right level is hugely important, right? Like you want to make sure you hit your goal. Figure out what you're trying to get out of it. It could be funding, right? For us, we're basically trying to cover initial costs, initial manufacturing, and all that. But can it help you with a minimum viable product then when you're going to that next level make some changes?
Can you
Can
disclose
you
what that?
understand? I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, can you disclose what your goal is going to be in October?
We actually don't know yet. We finalized some of the things. We'll probably not know that till launch because we're still trying to figure out some of the startup costs. We had to switch manufacturers. So we were working with one for a while, now working with another, which is great, less expensive, but it is changing some of the dynamics. So we'll know what our goal is. But we're probably going to do what most entrepreneurs do is aim a little lower and hope with some degree of confidence that we'll exceed that because then that's as much of an indicator to like investors that it's a success, it could be a successful product as really raising that amount of money. The other part is, and this is just intuitive to me, we'll see if it works, is you don't necessarily have to wait until you're doing it to start to build. um, we don't want to get caught flat-footed, so we are already out there doing stuff like this to be able to make people aware of it. Because if we can start having a mailing list and having content and things out there, like the big thing with a Kickstarter is like a website, right? People are like, "Oh, I built my website." Everybody's going to go to it. Nobody's going to go to it unless they know about it. So again, your network is your net worth, and the ability to go and say, "Wow, every time I do something in preparation, I'm doing more networking," right? And I look at it and say, people knowing about this now, yeah, does it open me to some vulnerabilities? It does. But the reality is, all the video and stuff that we have right now are all, final level prototypes. So there will be changes where if someone did try and copy it, we would still have some competitive advantage, and our patent would be updated to reflect some of the things we learned. Um, but the other part is, and this is something I'm hearing more and more, is storytelling. Get better at storytelling. We were joking in the beginning where I call where I live the Shire, like Rivendell. But there's a whole story about how I ended up here, where we were moving my dad in with us, and we needed a master suite on the first floor, and got lucky enough. And there's a really interesting component that this house was owned by or built by an entrepreneur who was an inventor, and there was like a weird entrepreneurial vibe here. But get good at storytelling, because the reality is now that's kind of the buzzword, right? And that's why people are doing podcasts. Like your whole podcast is about a story. When you launch that Kickstarter, and this is what I'm hearing, I'll know if we're successful later. Be able to tell your story, be able to tell your founder story, be able to tell the story of how you got to where you're going. It was funny, and I want to work this into my Kickstarter somewhere. I was at an event downtown, and there was this young man who was like a junior guy at a VC firm, and I think he was from China, kind of had a heavy accent. And we were talking, and he's like, "Hey, what's your story?" And I told him, and he goes, "Wow, it sounds like a Hollywood movie, because I started and I found my design guy, and then I found my operations guy. Like it's like the Dirty Dozen, or more like the Magnificent Seven." And I'm like, but that kind of things, you have to hear what resonate with people with your story, and write them down, and build that into your narrative and your company, because people buy into you and they buy into your story. They don't necessarily solely buy into the product. And this is coming from, again, I've had other ideas, I've been successful in other areas. This is the first product I'm bringing to market. But if you can read your audience and you see when something gets, that, keep that in your story and bring that in your narrative. And the other thing I tell people is, Kickstarter or otherwise, don't be shy. Like, if you're not passionate enough about what you're likely risking your life and your whatever money, and like if it's a big risk, you better be able to stand up in front of a room full of people and say, if you're using a regular knife, you're insane. That's for me. Whatever product you have, you better have that courage of conviction, because if you don't, it comes off. So
I wanted to get all the links that you can share for the audience that we can add to the description.
usinventor.org, definitely. I don't have our Kickstarter link yet. We had an issue with our website, but when it's up, it'll be www.nuluknives.com. Should be up by Monday. We switched providers, and they're just making it difficult for us.
How can
Bunker
people...
Labs,
Bunker Labs,
Bunker Labs, I think it's .org. They should definitely check out warriorrising.org. They should, there is great small business stuff out there. People should look into, what is it? Score is a huge one to help find a mentor.
What is that?
It's like
Society.
It's an acronym, but it's like retired old guys.
Retired executives. Yeah, Society, yeah, exactly. And something. Yeah, and that's not to keep plugging the book, but that's in the book as well, because I was encouraging people, get involved in the chamber, get involved in have those discussions. So I really appreciate you backing me up with a lot of things that you said are things that I believe that you've already seen that are successful, and I'm trying to reach out to these young and newer entrepreneurs to understand the value. And something that I said on the previous episode, and I'll repeat it here: no great idea. Not many great ideas come through Zoom calls. You've got to brush elbows against people, shake hands, press palms, look people in the eyes, sit at the table, break bread. That is where some really amazing, innovative stuff happens. We like to think that these great inventions happen by some lone genius in a cave, but often it's in a big room and, real weak looking chairs and, in a school hall somewhere. And
yep.
Then people meet and somebody discusses something, gets interested, and then that fire ignites from the idea.
Yeah, and what? I would say the other part is help other people, right? Like, if you're consistently giving, people know that that's what you're about, and they will help you make introductions and things like that. And even, we talked about joining business groups and things like that. The other thing I would say is get out and join other non-related organizations that have a philanthropic goal, because you will tend to find older people who have had professions and are now have the time to give back. You will find philanthropic people on their boards. You will find philanthropic people on their boards who also may be investors or may have relationships. And it's not always about the business, but people will judge how I think you as a person and your business on what you also do outside. And, it's been, I joined a lot of military organizations because I feel that has also helped me get further as an entrepreneur, and helping veterans has boomerang back in more ways than I could have expected. I didn't do it for that reason, but it definitely becomes part of the catalyst to make things go. And I do want to give a shout out of this organization. Picked the wrong side there. I'm the vice president of, in my area, we're the ones that do the honor flight. And you want to talk about an amazing way to also find opportunities, right? And find opportunities passively to really build great relationships with people who know your worth and want to help you. That kind of thing shouldn't be disregarded. And I think it's important. And if anybody, by the way, wants to donate, we just finished our 2024 flight and we're starting to fundraise for 2025. It's an amazing thing. And I think that sometimes life-changing donation of your time can also help you find purpose, and maybe even helps you find a business. So I would say don't leave that out, because it's really easy to get so business focused that you forget that there's other parts of your professional life that segue to your personal life that are really, really important as well.
I appreciate that, Doug. What's the best way if someone wants to keep up with what's going on with you and the development project of NULU? How can people connect with you? Would you prefer them to reach out?
The best thing would be to either go to our site or our social media. We're on most of the big ones. We're on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. We're on Instagram, and I think we're on X. And my marketing team is getting all that stuff up and running, and it's going to look a little bit better. But we're on all the socials, so they can find us there. It's sometimes NULU Knives, like NULU. That's the other thing. People, when you come up with a name, don't be scared if other people have it, if it's not relevant to your industry, but it may impact people finding you. So if they don't find NULU, if they put NULU Knives in, it'll take them right there. Our website, again, will be back up and running early next week, and that has QR codes for people to do a couple of things. So there's 3 ways people might want to keep in touch with us. If they want to buy one, get on our mailing list. We'll be in a position for pre-orders and such around the time of our Kickstarter. If people want to look into investment opportunities or strategic partnerships, that's another QR code, and we would love to talk to people who have either adjacent businesses who may be good strategic partners for us, or who would be interested in writing a check. The third one is adaptive organizations or a strategic partner who wants to actually do an official evaluation. We have a separate process for that, where they can make a request, and we'll send them one of our MVPs, like one of our minimum viable product prototypes, and they can try it out for a couple of weeks and see if it works. What we're finding is typically it's about a 3-day transformation, that at the end of the 3 days, they're like, oh, I get it. And then they're really on board the NULU train. But those 3 ways are the best to do it. If someone can't find it, they can reach out to me at dkatz@goredleg.com. It's not the wrong email address. Red Leg Innovation is, again, our ambition is to have that as our venture studio. If everything works with what we're doing now. But that will get to me, and I would be happy to have any kind of dialogue.
Looking forward to NULU and seeing what's going to happen with Red Leg Innovations. I appreciate your time, Doug. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Hey, thank you so much for the opportunity, and I hope it was valuable for your listeners. And good luck with the podcast. If I can help in any way, please let me know.
Thank you, Doug. I appreciate you. Take care. Thank you for joining us on the Free Time Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Robert Gaines. To support the channel, please click like, comment, subscribe, and share this episode. The book Scintilla, The Ultimate Guide to Generating Business Ideas, Products, and Services, is now available on Amazon. It's available as an ebook, softcover, and hardcover. Please find the link to the Amazon page in the description, as well as other links relevant to this episode.